We rented the place because it was cheap, pretty, and secluded in that listing way that makes you feel adventurous. Wisconsin, north of a small town called Alder Ridge. One gas station, one diner, a hardware store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. The cabin itself sat off a gravel road near a small lake, with woods behind it and two other properties spaced far enough away that you couldn't see them through the trees. There were 5 of us, me, Nate, 29. I was the one who booked the place and drove because I'm the guy who keeps backup chargers in the glove compartment. Jess, 27, my friend since college, sharp and practical, the type to read a contract before she signs anything. Marco, 30, loud in a fun way, always hungry, always making jokes. Tasha, 28, calm, observant, the one who notices what people aren't saying. And Ben, 31, who insisted he was not paranoid, while also bringing a heavy flashlight and a first aid kit. We arrived around 5:40 p.m. on a Friday. The sun was still up but low, and the lake looked like a sheet of dark glass with a line of reeds at the edge. The cabin was exactly like the photos. Wood siding, small porch, a fire pit out front, and a little dock that looked like it could give you a splinter just by looking at it. The lockbox code worked. The door opened on the first try. No weird smell, no broken glass, nothing obvious. I remember thinking, see? Easy. We deserved an easy weekend. Then I noticed the porch chair. It was one of those white plastic patio chairs. The listing photos showed 2 of them pushed against the wall near the door. But one was angled out toward the driveway like someone had been sitting there, watching the road. Marco grabbed the chair and laughed. Maybe the cabin comes with a free grandpa. Jess didn't laugh. She looked at the dirt by the porch step. Did we already make footprints? We hadn't. We'd barely walked up. There were shoe prints in the dusty dirt right below the living room window, close to the wall. Not boot prints, more like sneakers. The tread pattern was clear enough that I could tell it wasn't mine. Ben pointed to the ground. Could be from the cleaner. Or the last guests, Marco said, already dragging a cooler inside. Jess's eyes tracked the prints like she was following a trail. These are fresh. I put on a casual voice. Probably. They said a cleaner was here this morning. I didn't actually know if they said that. I just wanted the moment to pass. We unloaded the car. While we did, I kept noticing small things I couldn't explain, and I kept trying to explain them anyway. The fire pit had ash in it, like someone had used it recently. Not a big deal. Maybe previous guests. The trash bin in the kitchen was empty, liner fresh. Good, cleaner. But the back door, glass sliding door, had a smear at hand height, like someone had put their palm against it. Ben said, "That's probably from us." "It's on the outside," Tasha said quietly. We all looked. She was right. Marco shrugged, trying to keep it light. A bear wanted to see if we had snacks. Jess gave him a look. That's not funny. And that was the first time it hit me. We were out here with weak cell service. The map had shown 2 bars, but what that really meant was maybe 1 bar if you stand on a chair and pray. I told myself it was fine. There were 5 of us. We had 2 cars. We weren't helpless. We did what people do to claim a space, picked rooms, dropped bags, opened a few windows to air it out. I put music on my phone and connected it to the little Bluetooth speaker we'd brought. For about an hour, it felt normal. Then the knock came. Not on the front door. On the side of the cabin near the kitchen. 2 quick taps, like someone testing if the wall was hollow. We all froze for half a second, then reacted like we wanted to prove we weren't scared. Marco laughed too loud. Squirrel. Ben picked up his flashlight like he'd been waiting for an excuse. Jess moved to the kitchen window. She leaned forward and looked out into the trees. Nothing. The light outside was fading fast. The woods looked denser now, like the shadows were filling in gaps between trunks. Probably a branch, I said. Tasha didn't move from where she was standing. Branches don't knock twice like that. She said it calmly, which made it worse. We did a sweep, because that's what you do when your brain wants certainty. Ben and I went outside with the flashlight, even though it wasn't fully dark yet. We walked around the cabin. We checked under the porch, the side yard, the little path toward the dock. Nothing. No one. When we came back, Jess was at the table with her phone up trying to get service. Any bars? I asked. She tilted the screen toward me. 1 bar if I hold it by the window. It drops the second I move. Marco poured drinks like that solved problems. Then we're officially off-grid. Cheers. We ate, talked, played cards. We even laughed, real laughs. And for a while, the earlier stuff faded. At 9:30, the first car appeared. I noticed it because the headlights flashed between the trees. A slow crawl along the gravel road down past our driveway, then stopped. Not at a house, not at a gate, just stopped. We all went quiet like someone had turned the volume down. Ben said, "Is that someone parked?" We moved to the living room window, careful not to crowd it like a horror movie. The car was maybe 200 yards away, partially blocked by brush. Headlights off now, just a dark shape. Marco tried to sound normal. "Probably someone turning around." "Why turn around there?" Jess asked. That's when the passenger door opened. A thin rectangle of light appeared for a second, like an interior light. Then it shut. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't even be sure it was a person. But I knew someone had gotten out. Tasha stepped back from the window. "Don't stand there." Ben switched his flashlight on, pointing it down at the floor, not outside. "I'm going out." Jess grabbed his arm. "No, you're not." Ben looked offended. "I'm not scared." "I didn't say you were scared," she said. "I said don't go out there." I tried to split the difference. "Let's just lock everything. If it's nothing, we lose 10 minutes. If it's something, we'll be glad we did." So we locked up. Deadbolt, chain, back slider latch. We checked the windows. We told ourselves, if someone is just parked down the road, they'll leave. People do weird things in rural areas. Maybe it's a neighbor checking who arrived. And then the car started moving again. It rolled forward, slow, then continued down the road and disappeared. Marco let out a breath, like he'd been holding it. "See? Nothing." But that didn't feel like nothing. It felt like someone wanted us to know they'd been there. We went back to the cards, but the energy was different. Everyone was laughing half a beat late. Around 10:40, the power flickered. Just a quick blink. The lights dimmed and popped back on. Ben looked at the lamp. "Storm?" There wasn't a storm. The air was still. The trees weren't moving. Then it happened again. Flicker. On. Jess said, "That's not weather." The third time, the lights went out completely. The cabin fell into a quiet that felt too big. No fridge hum, no ceiling fan, just us and the lake and the woods. Marco tried to joke. "Okay, this is the part where someone says, 'Hello?'" No one laughed. I pulled my phone out. No service. Battery at 60%. Great. Ben snapped his flashlight on and aimed it at the ceiling. Could be a breaker. Or someone messed with the power, Tasha said. That sentence landed hard, because there was only one reason a stranger would mess with our power at night. I forced myself to move. Breaker box might be outside, I'll check. Jess said, No, 2 people. So Ben and I went. We didn't open the front door like idiots. We turned on the porch light, except it didn't work, because power. Ben opened the door just enough for us to slip out. He kept the flashlight beam low. The night air smelled like lake water and pine. It was cold enough that my skin tightened. The breaker box was on the side of the cabin. Ben swept the light across the wall. The box cover was open. I stared for a second, trying to make it make sense. Maybe it was already like that? Ben leaned closer. No. He pointed at the latch. It was intact, not broken, not loose, like someone had opened it properly. He shone the light inside. The main switch was flipped off. Ben looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't look tough. He looked alert. Someone did this, he said. And then behind us, something moved in the trees. Not a deer crashing through brush, not a raccoon. A slow shift, like a person stepping from one trunk to another. Ben swung the flashlight beam toward it. The light hit nothing for a second, then caught a reflective strip. Just a flash, like a safety vest, or a piece of tape on a jacket. Then it was gone. Inside, Ben said. We didn't run. We moved fast but controlled, because running in the dark is how you fall and break your ankle. We got back in. Jess was standing with a kitchen knife in her hand like she'd grabbed it without thinking. What? She demanded. Ben shut the door and locked it. Someone shut our power off. The breaker was flipped. Marco's face drained a little. That's not funny. Tasha said, Did you see someone? Ben hesitated like he didn't want to admit it. Something moved. I saw reflective material. Jess said, So it's a person. I said, Okay, everyone calm. We need a plan. That's when I realized how fragile our plan options were. No service, remote, night. A stranger outside who was confident enough to shut our power off and hang around. We tried our phones anyway. Jess found one bar if she stood in the back bedroom and held her phone up near a window. Call 911, I said. She tried. It didn't connect. Ben said, We can drive out. And go where? Marco asked. Down that road, past wherever that car was, in the dark? Tasha's voice stayed steady. We can leave now, or we can wait until he tries the door. Nobody wanted to say it, but waiting felt like giving him the advantage. So we made the decision that seemed safest in that moment. We were going to leave together, right now. We grabbed keys, jackets, phones, and the flashlight. We didn't pack. We didn't turn it into a vacation is over debate. We moved like the cabin was on fire. I checked the front window one more time. And that's when I saw the porch chair again. It wasn't where Marco left it. He'd shoved it against the wall after joking about the free grandpa. Now it was back in its angled position facing the driveway, like someone had sat there while we were inside in the dark. My mouth went dry. Guys, I said low. They came, they saw it. No one had a joke. Ben whispered, He's close. We didn't open the door yet, we listened. At first, nothing, then soft steps on wood, not inside, on the porch. One step, pause, another. Jess's hand tightened on the knife. Don't open it. Ben raised the flashlight, aiming it at the door like the beam could stop a person. A shadow passed under the gap. Someone was right there. And then the doorknob moved. Not jiggled like a drunk guy at the wrong house. Turned, slowly, like the person knew exactly how quiet they could be. The deadbolt held. The knob turned back, then tried again. Marco's voice cracked. "Hey, we're calling the cops." The knob stopped. Silence. A second later, something scraped along the door frame, metal on metal, like a key or a thin tool. Ben mouthed, "He has a pick." Tasha whispered, "How?" That question hit me too. How did a random stranger have tools for locks? Unless he wasn't random. Unless he'd done this before. Maybe at this cabin, maybe at others. Jess said, barely audible, "Back door?" I shook my head. The back slider was glass. If he wanted in, he could break it. We were standing in the living room like targets, lit by the flashlight, bounce off the walls. Ben said, "Get away from the windows now." We moved toward the hallway. I kept my eyes on the front door. The scraping stopped. Then, 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. Marco whispered, "What does he want?" Tasha answered very quietly, "To see what we'll do." Jess stepped forward just enough to speak through the door without being right against it. "You need to leave. Now." A man's voice came back. Close, calm. "I'm just looking for my dog." We all froze. Because that line was so normal it felt rehearsed. Jess said, "Not our problem, go." The man didn't raise his voice. "He ran this way. I saw your lights go out. Thought you might have seen him." Ben spoke louder. "Step off the porch. We're armed." We weren't. Not really. A kitchen knife and a flashlight and maybe a cast iron pan. But the sentence mattered. There was a pause. Then the man said, "Okay." We listened for footsteps. Nothing. Ben whispered, "He's still there." And that's when I heard it. A faint, quick sound from the side of the cabin, like a fingernail tapping glass. Not the front door, a window. He was splitting our attention on purpose. Tasha grabbed my sleeve and pulled me down the hall. "Don't chase sounds." Ben gestured. "Everyone in the back bedroom. Now." We piled into the bedroom like it was a bunker. Jess shut the door behind us. Ben turned the flashlight off for a second. In the darkness, my ears strained. I heard the porch boards creak again. Then the scraping sound returned. This time lower, like someone was working on the deadbolt. Jess whispered, "He's trying to get in." Marco said, "Why is he not leaving?" Nobody answered because the answer was too obvious. Ben handed me the flashlight. "You keep the beam on the door if it opens." "I'm blocking." He dragged the dresser, heavy, across the floor in front of the bedroom door. Jess's voice shook for the first time. "This is insane. This is actually happening." I forced words out. "We'll get out. We just need a signal." Tasha held her phone up, screen dim. "1 bar, gone. 1 bar, gone." Then Ben's phone buzzed. All our heads snapped toward it like it was a miracle. Ben looked at the screen. "No service. It's an emergency alert." He read it, confused. "Severe weather." "There is no weather," Jess hissed. Ben's face tightened. "It's delayed. The alert is from hours ago." So even the one signal we got was useless. And then, outside the bedroom window, a light appeared. A small flashlight beam sweeping the glass. Slow. Patient. Like he was checking if we were in there. I stared at that moving circle of light and felt my stomach drop. Because this meant he had walked around the cabin to the back, quietly while we were barricading. He knew exactly what he was doing. Marco whispered, Do we stay quiet?" Tasha said, "If he thinks we left, he'll come in and search." Jess said, "If he knows we're here, he'll keep trying." We didn't have a good option. Then the light stopped. right at the height of the window latch, and the window frame shifted, just a millimeter. A test. Ben mouthed, "He's checking locks." Jess held the knife with both hands now, like that helped. I said, "We need to leave, now, before he gets inside." Ben whispered back, "Front door is where he is." Tasha pointed to the bathroom window. "That one is small, but it opens to the side yard." We moved like we were diffusing something. Quiet. Careful. The bathroom window was narrow, but it was big enough. Ben eased it open an inch. The air that came in was cold and smelled like damp leaves. He listened. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the lake in the distance. Ben opened it wider. "Jess, you first." Jess looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Me?" "You're the fastest," Ben said. "Go, then Marco, then Tasha. Nate last with me." Jess swallowed and climbed out. Marco followed, clumsy but trying hard not to make noise. Tasha slid out smoothly, like she'd already decided she could do it. Then Ben looked at me. "You go." I shook my head. "You first." Ben didn't argue. He grabbed the flashlight and went. I was last, halfway through the window, when I heard the front door. Not the knob, the wood. A sharp crack, like a shoulder hitting it. He was forcing entry. I dropped the rest of the way out and landed hard, knees bending. No time to be quiet now. We ran, not toward the cars in the driveway, but around the side, staying low, cutting toward the gravel road. Because if he had a line of sight to the driveway, he could catch us there. We reached the edge of the road and stopped behind brush, panting. Jess whispered, "Cars. Now." We moved, fast and exposed, to the driveway. My car was closest. I hit the unlock button. Nothing. I hit it again. Nothing. For half a second, my brain tried to deny it. Battery dead, wrong button, whatever. Then I saw it. My driver's side tire looked wrong. Lower. Flattened. Ben aimed the flashlight down. The tire was shredded, not popped. A clean slice. "Are you kidding me?" Marco whispered, voice high. Ben checked his car. Same thing. 2 tires on Ben's car were cut. Not random damage, not a nail. Someone had taken a blade to rubber. Jess said, "He planned this." That sentence wasn't panic, it was realization. We stood there in the driveway, 2 disabled cars, weak phones, a man behind us who now knew we were trying to escape. And then we saw him. He stepped out from the shadow of the porch, slow like he had all the time in the world. He wasn't huge, average height, hoodie, jeans, something reflective on his sleeve. Tape, maybe. The same flash Ben saw earlier. He held something long in his right hand, not a gun, not a bat, a pry bar maybe. He lifted it slightly like a warning. Jess whispered, "Back up." Ben raised the flashlight and hit him full in the face with the beam. The man lifted an arm to block it, but not like he was surprised. Like he'd expected it. He spoke. Calm. Too calm. "Keys," he said. Marco blurted, "What?" "Keys," the man repeated a little sharper. "Toss them." Ben's voice was steady but loud. "Step back now. We'll leave when we can." The man laughed once, just a breathy sound. "You're not leaving." I felt something shift in me then. Anger, fear, adrenaline. Because he'd said it like it was a fact. Tasha grabbed Jess's arm. "Run to the road." But the road was open, no cover, and he was between us and the cabin, not between us and the road. We sprinted anyway. He lunged forward fast, closing distance. Ben swung the flashlight like a club. Not elegant, but desperate. The man flinched back, the beam jolting. Jess screamed, "Ben!" Ben shouted, "Go!" We ran down the driveway toward the gravel road. Behind us, footsteps pounded. Not all of them, just one set, his chasing. I looked back and saw him gaining, pry bar in hand, head down. That's when I realized we couldn't outrun him all the way to town, so I did something I didn't plan. I stopped. I turned and picked up a fist-sized rock from the edge of the driveway. My hands were shaking, but my aim didn't have to be perfect. He was close enough to see his face now. Unshaven, eyes wide, mouth tight with focus. Not a movie villain, just a man who'd decided he was taking control of the night. I threw the rock. It hit him in the shoulder, hard enough to make him stumble. He swore, loud, real. That moment of human reaction was almost worse, because it meant he wasn't some distant threat. He was right there. Ben seized the chance and slammed into him from the side. They crashed into the dirt near the driveway edge. Jess screamed again, and Marco grabbed her and pulled her toward the road. Tasha yelled, "Nate, help him!" I ran back, grabbed Ben's arm, and yanked. The stalker swung the pry bar blindly. It clipped Ben's forearm, not deep, but enough that Ben yelped and let go. Ben stumbled back, clutching his arm. The stalker got to his feet. He looked at us, just stared, breathing hard. Then he pointed the pry bar toward the cabin. "Back inside," he said. "Now." Marco shouted, "No." The man took one step toward Marco. Ben lifted the flashlight again, beam steady despite his injury. "You come closer, I'll put this through your teeth." It was a bluff, but it was a good one. The man paused. And in that pause, a sound cut through everything. A car engine. From the road. Headlights swung across the trees. For a split second, the stalker's face changed. Not fear exactly. Calculation. He turned his head toward the road like he was thinking, "Do I finish this?" The headlights got brighter. The stalker stepped back, then slipped sideways into the trees, moving fast, disappearing like he'd practiced. A pickup truck rolled up, slowing as it saw us in the driveway. A man leaned out the driver window. "You folks okay?" Jess practically ran to the truck. "Call the police, please. Someone was trying to break in." The driver's eyes went sharp. He looked past us toward the cabin, then to the woods. "Get in," he said. "All of you, now." We piled into the bed in the back seat, wherever we could fit. Nobody argued about safety belts. As soon as we were moving, Jess's phone caught a bar, just one, like the road itself had better signal. She dialed 911, and this time it connected. Her voice shook as she spoke, but she got the words out. Location, cabin, man with a pry bar, tires cut. I watched the trees as we drove away, half expecting him to step out again, half expecting another car to block us. But the road stayed empty. The pickup driver took us to his house, one of the properties we couldn't see from the cabin. He was older, maybe late 50s, wearing a flannel shirt, moving with the calm of someone who'd lived near woods his whole life. He got us inside, locked his door, and handed Ben a clean towel for his arm. Ben's cut wasn't severe, but it was bleeding enough to make everything feel more real. The driver said, "You said someone tried to break in?" Jess nodded. He shut our power off. He was on the porch. He asked for keys. He cut our tires. The man's jaw tightened. "You're at the Harris place." I blinked. "You know it?" He looked at me like I was slow. "Everybody knows it. That place has had issues." My stomach dropped. "What kind of issues?" He hesitated, then said, "People snooping around, theft. Folks say they hear someone on the porch at night." Marco snapped. "And they still rent it out?" The man spread his hands. "It's owned by someone out of state. They don't care as long as money hits the account." Jess asked, "Do you know who it is?" The man didn't answer immediately. He looked out his window toward the road, like he could see the cabin through the dark. Then he said, "There's a guy who lives in a trailer a mile north, keeps to himself, shows up at the diner sometimes, always watching." My skin prickled. "Is that him?" The man's voice stayed controlled. "Could be." Sirens arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 squad cars and a county sheriff truck. We gave statements in pieces because our brains were still sprinting. They drove back with us to the cabin, lights flashing across the trees. The front door frame had marks where something had been wedged. The breaker box was open, our tires were cut clean, and in the dirt below the living room window, the shoe prints were still there. The sheriff crouched and looked at the tread. "Same prints by the back window." Jess hugged herself. "So he was circling the house." The sheriff nodded slowly. He was patient. They searched the woods with flashlights. They found nothing that night. But they did find something else. On the side of the cabin near the porch, there was a small camera. Not one of ours. Not a security camera installed by the owner. A cheap battery camera taped under the eave, angled toward the driveway. I stared at it, feeling my face go hot. He'd been recording us, watching who came and went, timing when to cut power, seeing how many of us there were. A deputy peeled it off and dropped it into an evidence bag. Ben's voice was quiet. "So he knew 5 of us were here." The sheriff looked at Ben's arm, then back at us. "And he still came." That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about later. Not that a person tried, that he tried anyway. We didn't sleep at the cabin, obviously. The sheriff escorted us to town, helped us get a motel room, and told us they'd patrol the area. The next morning, we went back with daylight and police nearby to get our stuff. Daylight made the cabin look normal again, and that made me angry. Because in the sunlight, it was just a rental. But I couldn't unsee the porch chair angled toward the driveway. I couldn't unhear the doorknob turning slowly like he was savoring it. Before we left, the sheriff pulled me aside. "Owner's going to be notified," he said. "We're also talking to a person of interest." "Did you catch him?" I asked. He didn't say yes. He said, "We found the trailer, we found tools, and we found tires in a burn pile." My throat tightened. "Our tires?" He didn't confirm, but his look told me enough. Jess wanted to press charges. So did Ben. The sheriff said it would take time, but they had enough to hold him at least on some charges. We drove home on a spare tire and pure adrenaline. On Sunday night, back in my apartment, I kept checking my door lock like it could change on its own. I got a call midweek from the sheriff's office. They'd arrested the man. He wasn't a drifter, he was local. A guy with prior complaints, trespassing, harassment, petty theft. Nothing that had ever stuck long enough to keep him off the road. This time they had the camera, the tools, the tire cuts, the breaker box fingerprints, and apparently footage, because he'd been filming long before we arrived. The deputy who called me said one thing that made my stomach flip again. He told us he thought you'd leave faster. I went quiet, because that meant he'd done it before. He'd shut power off, tested locks, cut tires, watched people panic. He didn't need monsters. He didn't need darkness. He needed time, and a place where nobody could hear you yell. We got our deposit back after a fight. The owner pretended to be shocked. The platform sent us a form apology. Ben's arm healed in a week. Jess still sleeps with her phone on loud. Marco doesn't joke about off-grid anymore, and me? I don't book secluded rentals now without one simple thing. I check where the nearest neighbor is. Because if someone is willing to stand on a porch in the dark and turn a doorknob slowly, they're not there to scare you. They're there to see what you'll do. And if you're far enough away from help, sometimes the answer doesn't matter.